Imagine putting like a completely incompetent person in charge of a massive high-stakes project. It's annoying, right?
Incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it's just frustrating. But what if I told you that simple incompetence in a position of authority isn't just, a human resources mistake? What if it is actually classified as a profound act of cosmic oppression?
That really forces a complete reframing of how we view the basic mechanics of society, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we usually think of structural collapse in terms of physics.
Right, like a bridge failing because the steel was weak.
Exactly. But the philosophical argument we are unpacking today suggests that the universe has a moral architecture. And when we ignore the rules of that architecture, the collapse is just as devastating, even if it's totally invisible.
And that invisible architecture is exactly what we are mapping out today for you, because today happens to be a very special date.
Yes, it is.
It's Sunday, May 10th, 2026. It's Mother's Day. So we are setting out on a unique mission for this deep dive.
A really fascinating mission.
Yeah. We are going to take these incredibly rigid structural rules of how existence functions, concepts like scale, balance, and what's known as the axis of nobility. And we're going to see how they directly collide with something entirely immeasurable.
The unconditional justice of a mother's love.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, initially sounds like oil and water.
It really does. You have the cold, hard mechanics of societal duty on one hand, and then the warm, boundary-defying nature of a mother's compassion on the other.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with those cold, hard mechanics, because there is an idea we're looking at today in our first source that establishes a fundamental rule. The quote is, "Being in its rightful place is the honor of existence."
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And to visualize this, the author uses this brilliant metaphor of a nut and a bolt. If you look at the grooves of a nut, those little spiraling threads on the inside?
Right, the yiv in Turkish.
Yes. They aren't just arbitrary contours of metal. They represent a moral contract with the whole.
And that phrase, moral contract with the whole, it takes a basic engineering function and elevates it to a philosophical imperative.
It really raises the stakes.
It does. It introduces us to the first true pillar of societal balance, which is competence or proficiency. In classical frameworks, you'll hear this referred to with terms like iliyat or liaquat.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it doesn't just mean having a pulse and a job title. It means possessing the actual demonstrable skill and merit to fit perfectly into the specific groove you were meant to occupy in society.
Right, and if you hand a crucial task to someone who lacks that merit, it is quite literally like trying to force a grooveless nut onto a bolt.
Good luck with that.
Right. I mean, anyone who has ever tried to fix a piece of furniture knows exactly what happens there. If you smash that smooth nut hard enough with a hammer, it might actually hold the pieces together for a brief moment.
Barely.
Barely. Because the second someone leans on that table, or the second there is the slightest tremor, the entire thing just falls apart.
And this is where the philosophy takes a sharp turn into the moral realm. Think about a surgeon, for example.
Okay.
What a surgeon's precision is to their scalpel, a leader's merit is to their decision-making. Putting someone without merit into a position of authority isn't just an oops moment.
It's not just an inefficiency.
No, not at all. It is defined as a silent, profound crime against the balance of existence itself.
I want to push back on that severity, though. Just a little bit.
Go for it.
Let's look at that grooveless nut again. If I see a nut without grooves, I just see a factory error. It's a manufacturing mistake. Why elevate someone just being bad at their job to a betrayal of human dignity?
That's a fair question.
I mean, isn't labeling an incompetent middle manager or a bad politician as an oppressor a bit extreme?
It only sounds extreme until you examine the classical philosophical definition of justice. We often think of justice as, a courtroom,
gavels, and judges.
Yeah, right. But fundamentally, justice is simply the act of placing things exactly where they belong. A shoe belongs on a foot. A scalpel belongs in the hand of a trained surgeon. That is justice.
Okay, I follow you so far.
So if justice is placing things where they belong, what is the opposite?
Displacing them.
Displacing them. And the term for that displacement is oppression. Philosophically, it's often referred to as zulm. Oppression is the active practice of displacing things from their rightful home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you seat an incompetent person in a position of authority, you are actively displacing authority itself. You are denying the capable person their rightful place.
And I guess simultaneously, you are forcing everyone else under that authority to live in a building held together by grooveless nuts.
Exactly. You are subjecting them to the inevitable collapse. That isn't just inefficiency. That is the purest form of oppression.
Okay, when you frame it like that, it's actually terrifyingly clear. You are stripping the moral contract from the universe. You're putting a scalpel in the hands of a toddler and calling it leadership.
Which is a terrifying thought.
Very. But having competence, having that perfectly grooved nut, isn't the end of the story, is it?
No, it's just the beginning.
Because even a perfectly manufactured nut will rattle and fail if the bolt itself is vibrating out of the wall. You need the second pillar to hold the structure together. You need trust.
Trust is the mortar between the bricks. Philosophically, it's described as emin, and it goes far beyond just a passive feeling of safety or the absence of fear.
So it's an action.
Yes, it is an active, lived state of being credible, of being emin. It is society's collective daily practice of looking at one another and signaling, no harm shall come to you from me.
No harm shall come to you from me. That is such a powerful promise.
It really is.
It's an active commitment rather than just hoping no one robs you today. But what happens when that promise starts to fade? When people stop believing that their neighbors or their institutions are actually credible?
When trust evaporates, the structure falls back on raw, unrefined power. The philosophical argument here notes that society descends into defective situations.
What does that mean exactly?
It means people realize they can't rely on the moral contract, so arbitrariness takes over. If I don't trust you to respect my boundaries, my only option is to use force to protect myself. The entire concept of nobility completely vanishes.
Let's define nobility in this context, because it's not about bloodlines or sitting in a castle.
No, not at all.
Nobility here is defined as a deep, unwavering loyalty to one's essence. The underlying term is fitra. It's like a stone's absolute loyalty to gravity.
That's a great way to put it.
Or a human being's unwavering loyalty to their word. You know exactly what a stone will do if you drop it. It falls. You should know exactly what a noble person will do when tested.
And without that nobility, without that loyalty to one's essence, society loses all of its structural integrity. And there's a brilliant, highly visceral biological metaphor used to describe what human beings turn into when trust and caliber disappear.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
They become like jellyfish.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about a jellyfish. It is this amorphous, drifting blob. It is completely spineless.
Just floating along.
Right. It only consumes, and it just constantly changes shape according to whatever the ocean current is doing at that exact second.
Sure, it's transparent, but not because it's honest or vulnerable.
Exactly. It's transparent because it completely lacks essence, weight, and internal structure. So the jellyfish is essentially the biological equivalent of the grooveless nut.
Wow, yeah.
Both of them completely lack the necessary spine or grooves to uphold any kind of moral contract with the universe.
Let's take that a step further and look at how that jellyfish behavior manifests in our everyday human interactions. It shows up in a concept known as flippancy, or loblick.
Flippancy, okay.
Yeah, flippancy isn't just being casual or cracking a joke. It is the dangerous melting away of necessary boundaries.
Give me an example of that in the real world.
Think about a master craftsman and an apprentice, or a manager and an entry-level employee. If the master becomes excessively flippant, treating the apprentice like a drinking buddy during crucial work hours, it might feel friendly on the surface.
Sure, everyone wants a cool boss.
Right. But they are actually melting the necessary structural boundaries of that relationship. A truly noble person protects their distance. They protect their grooves.
Because if they don't...
Because the moment boundaries dissolve, arbitrariness rushes in to fill the void. The apprentice no longer knows if they're being critiqued by a friend or instructed by a boss.
You have to know where your role ends and the other person's begins. If you melt the boundaries, you lose the balance.
And the only thing that prevents those boundaries from melting into flippancy or hardening to tyranny is the third element of this architecture.
Which is virtue.
Virtue. Virtue is the soul of this entire axis. It takes the cold, technical requirements, your confidence and your trustworthiness, and transforms them into a moral stance. Think of it like static calculations in architecture.
I want to make sure we really understand that, because static calculation sounds incredibly technical.
In civil engineering, a static calculation is the complex math an architect does to ensure a building can withstand its own weight, as well as external forces like wind, rain, or a massive earthquake. If the math is wrong, the building physically cannot stand. It is a law of nature. Well, virtue operates as the static calculation of human relations.
So when a crisis hits a society, an economic crash, a pandemic, a political upheaval, it's like an earthquake hitting a skyscraper.
Exactly.
If the relationships inside that society aren't built with the static calculations of virtue, the columns buckle.
The columns buckle, and you are left with a pile of rubble. What's fascinating here is a classical couplet from the text that captures this perfectly. By justice all things stand. Without it, a dungeon is the ground.
A dungeon is the ground. Wow.
A society without virtue eventually collapses under its own weight and becomes a dungeon for the people living in it.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the blueprint we've just drawn. We have this massive, awe-inspiring philosophical structure. We have the grooved nut of competence preventing oppression.
Right.
We have the unbreakable promise of trust keeping the jellyfish at bay. And we have the static calculations of virtue keeping the columns upright.
It's a very rigid architecture.
Very rigid. These are grand, heavy pillars keeping the universe from collapsing. But if the world requires this strict architecture to survive, how does something as immeasurable and boundary-defying as unconditional love fit into the blueprint?
That's the big question.
Because love doesn't follow static calculations. And that brings us to the core of what we are exploring for Mother's Day.
It is the ultimate paradox. Because when we shift our focus to unconditional love, specifically a mother's love, we're looking at the absolute highest embodiment of these exact principles.
But it manifests in a way that feels completely foreign to the strict, cold mechanics we just laid out.
Right. Because for a mother, the mere existence of her child is enough. There is no prerequisite of merit.
You don't have to earn your place in her arms the way you have to earn a leadership position.
Exactly. There's this incredible contrast between what we might call courtroom justice and a mother's justice. Nowadays, if you say the word justice, most people picture a judge's gavel, scales, weights, and strict punishment for stepping out of bounds.
But true justice, in its most profound societal form, looks a lot more like a mother's silent sacrifice.
Which requires a massive shift in our understanding. Courtroom justice is inherently calculated. It requires evidence and proportional retribution. But consider this counter perspective. A mother's love cannot be placed upon a scale.
No, it can't.
Any attempt to measure it fundamentally misunderstands what it is, because it is entirely beyond measure. Mothers do not dispense their love or their safety through a calculated formula of inputs and outputs.
And this leads to a fascinating concept called the discipline of mercy. When a child makes a mistake, when they violate a boundary, a mother often covers up that fault. She hides the flaw.
She does.
Now, in a courtroom, covering up a fault is a crime. It's injustice. But the argument here is that a mother isn't leaning toward oppression when she does this. She is exercising the discipline of mercy.
She is proving that true justice is the ability to uphold what is right without breaking the heart.
Let's really analyze that phrase, without breaking the heart.
Think about the psychology of human behavior. When someone is strictly punished for a flaw, it often breeds resentment. They focus on the punishment, not the mistake.
Absolutely. They get defensive.
Right. But when a mother covers a fault with mercy, when she protects her child from the harsh exposure of their own failure, it often inspires a much deeper internal accountability. The child feels the weight of that grace. That is the discipline of mercy.
But I have to stop and ask how we reconcile these two halves of our deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because in the first half, we established that cosmic balance requires absolute rigid adherence to boundaries. The nut has to have grooves. The master cannot be flippant. It is strict.
It is.
If justice is putting things exactly where they belong, how do we reconcile that with a mother who covers faults, who doesn't use scales, and whose love is immeasurable? Isn't she melting the boundaries? Isn't she acting like the flippant master?
It seems like a contradiction until you look closer at the underlying philosophy of nobility. Remember, nobility is remaining loyal to your essence.
Right, the stone falling.
Yes. A mother's absolute essence is compassion. Within a mother's eyes, those three pillars, competence, trustworthiness, and virtue, don't exist as separate, rigid columns. They live together in complete unity.
They are unified through her actions.
Unified through her actions and her intention. Her nobility is perfectly defined by the ability to carry immense strength with profound gentleness. She is remaining strong without harming another.
So she isn't just a jellyfish.
No, she isn't melting the boundaries like a jellyfish. She has incredible structural strength. She knows exactly how to fit the nut to the bolt, but she applies that strength with such delicate mercy that the metal never scrapes.
That's beautiful.
She upholds the standard, but she does it in a way that nurtures the growth of the child rather than just punishing the failure.
Remaining strong without harming another. That really is the key, isn't it? And that scales up so beautifully because we're not just talking about the dynamics inside a single family home.
No, we're looking at the global implications of this mechanism.
Right. The rigid architectural philosophy warned us about a universal collapse into a dungeon if trust and virtue fail. But this perspective on maternal love shows us how a mother's invisible justice is actually the force that heals that collapse.
It is the practical application of that healing. There's an observation in the text that what truly keeps a home standing is not the hardness of its brick walls, but the softness of a mother's voice.
The softness of a voice acting as the ultimate load-bearing column. I love that imagery. And there's this metaphor of spring rains that perfectly captures how this invisible justice operates.
It's a very evocative metaphor.
It suggests that mothers arrive in our lives quietly. There is no grand display of thunder, no demand for attention, but they are full of life-giving abundance. They awaken the dormant earth without hurting it.
They can renew branches that everyone else thought were completely dried up and dead.
Yes, and perhaps the most poignant idea from the text, a mother touches time without wounding it.
Let's explore why that metaphor of spring rain is so vital for a functioning society. When humanity is exhausted, when a culture has been ground down by the friction of incompetence, when trust has broken down and everyone is resorting to raw power, hearts become incredibly weary.
Oh, for sure. Everyone is just tired.
You cannot fix a society that is paralyzed by fear and power dynamics by applying more raw power. You can't hammer the structure back together.
Because hitting a broken structure with a hammer just creates more rubble.
Precisely. If the balance of the world is going to be restored after a period of deep societal weariness, it won't be through force. It will happen through the slow, seeping arrival of conscience.
It happens through mercy.
It happens through the invisible justice carried by those who operate like mothers. Mothers do not merely raise individual biological humans. They set the emotional and moral direction for the entire heart of a society.
Wow.
Whenever humanity hits a dead end, spring is forced to begin again through their silent prayers and their uncalculated grace.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the whole picture we've painted today for you, on one side, we have the warning that when we lose trust and competence, society devolves into a cold, transactional nightmare.
The strong just crush the weak and everyone else drifts like jellyfish.
Exactly. But on the other side, we see that a mother's silent compassion isn't just a warm, sentimental feeling we celebrate once a year. It is an actual, tangible, gravitational counterforce.
Yes.
It is the mechanism that actively keeps the universe on its moral axis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the connection between the two becomes undeniable when you revisit our definition of trust. Remember the active promise that keeps society from collapsing.
No harm shall come to you from me.
Yes. The ultimate promise. Think about the psychological reality of a mother's presence. That phrase is quite literally the definition of her existence to her child. No harm shall come to you from me.
That's so true.
She is the ultimate living embodiment of being emin, of absolute trustworthiness. She inspires a profound sense of safety that requires zero calculation from the person receiving it.
No static calculations required to feel safe.
Right. When philosophers talk about the axis of nobility being sustained by spreading trust throughout society, they are outlining, in highly academic terms, exactly what a mother does instinctively every single day. She is the gravitational center that stops the human soul from turning into a jellyfish.
She is the static calculation of virtue that keeps the whole building from coming down.
She is the architecture itself.
We have covered so much ground today. We started in this incredibly strict mechanical world of philosophical nuts, bolts, and cosmic gravity. We examined the terrifying reality of the grooveless nut and how simple incompetence can quietly function as a profound act of oppression.
We navigated the dangers of a society that has lost its trust, melted its boundaries, and resorted to raw power.
And ultimately, we found the perfect anchor for all of existence, not in a courtroom or a physics textbook, but in the gentle, immeasurable, and invisible justice of a mother.
Is a journey that forces you to reconsider what true strength actually looks like.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder as you go about your week, something that builds on everything we've explored today. We spend a lot of time discussing how mothers embody the perfect balance of competence, trust, and virtue by covering faults and offering the discipline of mercy. But think about this. If the world truly turns on the axis of this kind of nobility, how might our professional workplaces, our massive corporations, or even our global political systems completely transform if our leaders adopted this invisible justice?
That's a huge question.
What if, instead of relying solely on the cold mechanics of authority, performance reviews, and rigid penalties, our leaders focused on holding people accountable without breaking their hearts?
It would change everything.
Imagine what kind of static calculations that would require from a CEO or a president, and imagine how incredibly resilient those structures could truly be when the next crisis hits. It completely changes the blueprint for how we build our world.
It really does.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today, for taking the time to explore the grooves, the gravity, and the grace that keeps our world turning. Keep questioning the mechanics around you, look for the invisible justice, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.